I think writing fiction has to come, maybe writing in general, but I'm sure about writing fiction, it has to come from a deep place. And I think I spent a big part of my life preparing to write this novel without knowing I was preparing. That is to say, really coming to some kind of real understanding of what actors do and how complicated and strange they are, and then the psychology of actors that really interests me a lot. And this woman, I mean, she's a star. She's not just an actor, she's a star. And there's a certain kind of diva figure that also interests me. I mean, there are people like Sarah Bernhardt or Vanessa Redgrave or Jean Moreau or people like that who are very complicated, very thoughtful people who have some public role to play. I think that what I do as a writer, there's certainly a lot of thought that goes into it. There's a lot of worry. There's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of consciousness. And yet when it really happens, you feel you're taking down dictation, that you have a sense that something is happening that you don't control, and that's why it's as good as it is. So it's always a mix between an extreme degree of self-consciousness and a surrender to a process that carries you like a wave.
I mean, I've heard stories of people that would just it would just hit them, what you're just talking about, right? And they sat with pen and pencil and just pour it out. I mean, they could not do it fast
I've actually
enough.
had the feeling sometimes that it was actually just coming out of my fingers. Exactly.
I have been transformed. I have been created and transformed and continue to be changed by my relationship to various arts, music, painting, film, literature, dance. They all have a great claim on me. Literature is the one that I felt I most called on to work in, but it's also, in a way, an act of gratitude as much as an act of emulation, humility, perhaps much more than ambition. It comes from being a reader. I think a writer is, first of all, a reader. And my deepest motivation for wanting to be a writer and wanting to be a good writer and wanting to be a better writer is the ecstasy which I have had as a reader.
I don't blame people at all for not understanding, most people. Why should they? They haven't been told. There's been a consistent disinformation campaign, and, I mean, a country needs leadership. Most people aren't naturally interested in foreign policy and foreign issues. Why should they be? They're interested in their families and their communities. People have to, at this point, you have to have leadership, and the leadership is lacking. If you start to know about the history of Iraq, or the history of the United States, or the history of any other place, you're going to think a little differently. So that historical context, I think, is something that we want to set the images in. And we always want to be making the effort to think how other people think. What would you feel like if you were an Iraqi civilian who hated Saddam Hussein? Let's take that for granted, of course, as I'm sure many of the citizens of Iraq do, because he's such a horrible dictator. Still, what might you feel? I don't think most people, it's hard to make that effort to think how the other person feels, but that's really what a moral life is, an ethical life is trying to take in some of the reality of what other people feel or how they see things from their point of view. I like thinking that my life is not finished, that it's a work in progress.
But I mean, you have been. I mean, everybody. Yours is more of a public recognition of an evolution in terms of it's almost you could write a book called The Evolution of an Intellectual. You know.
Well.
Right. It is.
I've changed. I've changed.
You have changed.
I've changed. I don't. Yeah, I've changed. I've become a different writer.
Right. You have.
I like that idea. You know, I think, Charlie, this is maybe a rude thing to say. Most writers do their best work in the first third or first half of their writing life. It just is a fact.
Most artists do the best work in the first.
I'm not so sure about painters. And certainly not.
I get a lot of people tell you. Well, I'm not sure about painters either. But I mean, I know a lot of people think that Picasso's best work was the early stuff.
Well, but a lot of painters. I mean, think of Goya. Think of
Matisse did.
Well, I think the late work of many painters and many composers, certainly great composers, sure, Beethoven, And of course, there are examples of writers. Dostoevsky, obviously, his greatest work was toward the end, and so on and so on and so on. But I think mostly writers do their best work early. So I guess I am a little proud of the fact that I actually, maybe presumptuously...
Continue.
No, I go further than that. It's not being too immodest. I think my best work is now. I'm not just continuing. I think this...
Why?
I think these books are better. I think The Volcano Lover, that novel I wrote in the early 90s, and the new book in America actually is the best stuff I've ever written. I think so.
But what do you think in your mind separates it? Is it the command of language? Is it the command of story? Is it the what?
Well, I think I'm freer. I think my writing is more expressive. I actually don't think I've changed, but I think my access, this doesn't sound too weird, I think my access to myself has changed. I think I was going through a kind of narrow door, and now I'm going through a big, wide gate. I'm able to put a lot more of what I know and feel into my books. I think I was laboring under a lot of inhibitions in the past, and I think, for one thing, I was particularly sitting on a I don't know, a talent or an idea or a skill, or I don't even know what to call it, storytelling, which I didn't even know I was a storyteller. I thought I was some kind of, I use the word intellectual, and I'm not going to, deny that that's what it must look like sociologically, but I certainly never thought of myself that way, but I did think I was a ruminator. I thought I was somebody sort of that liked to chew things over, and that I was a fairly, that my subjects were sort of contemplative. Though there was whatever activist life I might have out there, but that wasn't me as a writer. As a writer, I thought I was more interested just in the process of consciousness and dramatizing different kinds of feelings people had. As a playwright, as a writer of short fiction and novels, etc. Then with the last two novels, The Volcano Lover and above all this one in America, I discovered I was a storyteller, that I actually liked to tell stories. This book is actually kind of epic. Again, though, I think it's what you do with your experiences if you have the energy to work with them and not just be the passive recipient of them. I mean, yeah, I'm sure that those were deepening experiences, but I think the thing I most respect in myself is that I kept on working on myself, really. I kept on working on myself to try to be a better writer. And now I think I have had some kind of breakthrough with these novels, particularly within America. Stuff like that.
All the stuff you just said is so wonderful. I mean, what inhibitions do you get rid of? I mean, were these sort of self-censorship and protection, and so now you
sort of what the hell kind of
yeah, exactly. I mean, is it a kind of liberation that from look, I am who I am and I don't give a damn?
I guess it's something like that. I never think of it that way. I just thought, I felt I could spread my wings. I felt I could even be entertaining. Well, I discovered that certain things I did, that I wrote, it's a very funny thing to describe, that I actually had tears in my eyes when I was writing them. This happened with the last novel, with The Volcano Lover, and then I thought, well, that's great. I love that. I love that when I read, that I'm really moved, that I think of writing fiction as an education, of reading fiction, rather. I think that the great novels are education of feelings, of your sympathies. They enlarge your sympathies. We're always kind of shriveling and becoming narrower. This is what age does to us. I don't mean age in the sense of old age. I mean just age in the sense of having your life. That you come, if you don't work on it, but there's my idea again, that the self is a project. If you don't work on yourself, you more and more are relying on rote or routine responses to things. You sort of build up your habits and your preferences and your responses. And fiction is like an axe that cuts all through that and kind of splits you open and gives you a model for caring about things that you might not otherwise care about. And I've found that capacity in myself.